workshop to order. This is a workshop for consideration of budget items for the 2017-2018 year. I overheard the administrator say just a moment ago as we went into recess, there are I guess two people at this table at this point in time that remember the good old days when we would have at least 4 or 5 of these types of sessions before we would spend 3 or 4 hours considering the budget, often line item by line item. And I am not only glad to say, but proud to say that we have moved beyond that, not out of a lack of concern for what we do or how we do it, but just because we have acquainted ourselves with the process and a much deeper understanding of the process, as well as having positioned ourselves to not be in a position where every line item has to be scrutinized. And I think that is attributable to our staff and our council and the leadership of our department heads in regards to how we have both planned and budgeted and enacted our budgets through the years. And so the intent of this workshop tonight is not to revisit the old days so much as it is to give us some oversight of the process and where we are in that process, and to acquaint ourselves with the budget, still knowing that we've got 2 more meetings in front of us, and I know the administrator will fill in the blanks on that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to staff and to our administrator.
Thank you, sir. What we would like to do this evening is spend some time with you looking at our budget process, looking at how we got to the point where we are now, how we are evaluating through our comprehensive plan, our strategic plan, also through your annual planning retreat, along with the actions that you take throughout the year, how we are able to take that information and develop it, to mold it into a work plan, so that we then are able to propose a budget to you. The way that the process works, and you are very aware and familiar with that, it is the administrator's role to propose a budget to mayor and council for consideration and ultimate adoption, and then that budget goes back to your staff for implementation throughout the year. One of the things that we've been able to put into place here over the last several years is full disclosure of our budget, and that's one of the reasons that we are not necessarily in a position that we go through the budget line item by line item, simply because that information is provided to you and it is provided to the general public. That information is there throughout the budget consideration process, and that information is certainly available to our public and to you as we work through the budget all year long. In our reporting process, we compare all of this data on a continuous basis. We look at our dashboards to make sure that we are tracking our progress relative to the budget. The budget is our work plan. The budget is the driving force behind, as a policy, what you set for us and the priorities that you establish through the budget process. So while we may be making those recommendations at this point, ultimately, as a matter of policy, whether you amend or you adopt, that is the document that we then take and we implement over the next year. I'm often asked how this process really comes into place and how long do we spend in preparing these documents for you. I can let you know that on July 1st, when we adopt a new budget, we start the process of beginning to look at the next year's budget. It is a continuous process for us. The lion's share of that work starts to happen really after the first of the year, once we complete our CAFR and we have all of our audits finished. Once we have the opportunity then to start looking at what our financial needs will be for the next year, that starts happening in that January, February, March time frame. Our departments get involved in the process. All of our department heads will meet with me individually. I will review with them their requests, their recommendations that they are making. One of the things that we required of our department heads this year was a justification for any staff requests that they were making. They had to do that in writing, and they had to also meet with me so that we were able to work through that. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we work through the process as well. One of the things that we're certainly recognizing is that, in this, our general fund is indeed what's the largest portion of all that we do. $24 million is involved in our general fund. We have 11 funds altogether, and so as you can see, as we start to look at each of those, whether it's our contingency fund, recreation program fund, our lease purchase capital improvement fund, debt service funds, hospitality taxes, stormwater, real property, our revolving fund, sanitation services fund, facilities use fund, and our road paving fund as well. We will take a look at all of those, again, not line item by line item, but what we are trying to accomplish as you would establish through policy in that. So we will start with Fund 11. Fund 11 will be the first budget that you have in front of you. It's going to be the bulkiest of all of those. This year, that Fund 11, our general fund, is proposed at $24,181,819. I call your attention to the screens so that you get some idea of how our budget has progressed, at least through 2008. You can see that we had 3 years or so that we were in declining overall general fund budgets, and then we started having some moderate increases from 2011 moving forward, probably one of our larger increases last year, and then of course as we move into this budget at $24,181,000 plus. This budget allows us to consider how we want to go about doing the day-to-day operations of the city, the services that we're going to provide. But obviously we have to look at where those dollars come from. The pie chart that you see on the screen identifies that property taxes, franchise, and license are our two largest sources of income. 76.59% of all revenues to the city come from those two categories, 47.52% on the property tax side and 29.07% on franchise and license. As you are aware, we had a great deal of concern with our state legislature this year dealing with franchise and license, and this is the reason why. It is a significant issue for us, and it is an issue that we must constantly stay in front of our state legislators about. Any type of state statute, any type of legislation that could adversely impact those revenues, not from the perspective of allowing us the ability to create new or more, but to protect that which we have, is now and continues to be essential for us going forward. And we'll continue to monitor that state legislation, we'll continue to keep you involved, and we'll continue to ask that you advocate on our behalf. Because again, those two sources, just themselves, between property tax and license and fees, accounting for 76.59% of our total budget, is significant for us.
Ed?
Yes, sir.
Would you say that we budgeted 22.7 and you're expecting it to be 24.5? Is that due mainly to building?
On the revenue side, a large portion of what you will see is relative to development. But one of the things that we do in that is that we try to stay extremely conservative on the ad valorem tax side.
So that's one down from that.
And that's typically, and you'll see in a graph in just a moment why that tends to happen. So I'll try to explain that in just a moment, but if not, if I don't do it adequately, let me know, and I'll make sure that either someone else who maybe understands it differently than I do, or that I explain it a little different.
That was the only thing.
But it does stand out.
Yeah, right.
It stands out because we have so much income coming from that area, but even as large as it is, we've tried to back that up so that we are not over-projecting what we think would happen. What we want to be careful of is that we don't have large projects that may not recur, and we go, oh, well, we're going to have a 3%, 4%, 5% to last year's growth, and we may not get those large projects. We may be just as busy, but it may not have the same value. So we try to be very, very careful of that. Everybody? Good. Making sure everyone's got copies. Our revenue history is one of the things that I wanted to at least identify on this slide. As you can see, we're looking at property taxes, franchise license, permits and fees. But those two large items, the triangle at the top, the green, and the purple item right below it, the square, those are our two largest items, property taxes, franchise, and license fees. And you can see what they have been doing since around 2007. Well, what starts to happen, if you look to the far right-hand side of that screen, if I were to go out and project what I actually think will happen in 2018, I believe that those revenues, sorry, audience, I actually believe that you would see happen here what happened here and here. We actually believe that those revenues will come in higher, but we believe that we have a responsibility to be conservative in those, because anything can happen that can give us a downward tick. And if that happens, we want to be prepared for it. We would much rather finish the year with a surplus so that we can take those dollars and put those into projects like we're doing right now, so that we can do lighting projects on Highway 29 and use cash, so we can do streetscape projects in downtown. When we have the ability that the economy operates better than we would project it to do, that is a good thing for us. So we're able to make projections based on, again, conservatively, we're able to make these projections that allow us to present a budget that is balanced, a budget that does not require any increase to fees or taxes or those types of things, but still allows us to be cautious that if our development doesn't stay at the same levels that it is now, it enables us to be able to make those adjustments quickly, and then we have the resources to be able to weather that, and then make further adjustments if we were to get into a real dire financial position, very similar to what happened back in the recession period. So we believe that we've learned from that experience, and we're better able to make those projections so that we're protecting ourselves against that. When we look at our property tax revenues, particularly when we're looking at Greenville County, Spartanburg County, obviously we can see that there's a large gap between the two. But again, we're at about a 65-35 ratio. Used to be 60-40, but now we're at about 65-35 relative to property value. Some instances that property value may even be pushing more to the 70-30 point. Land area, we're still basically in a 60-40 position between Spartanburg County and Greenville County. But residential and commercial development tends to occur on the Greenville County side. Our industrial development, job creation tends to occur over on the Spartanburg County side. But our revenues have been strong, and they've been growing on both sides of those. So we've been continuing to see that good forward progress, and of course we've been able to do that without any type of millage increases as we go forward. Property value. Yes. Out of sequence. Excuse me. Okay. From a property value standpoint, over the last 10 years, we've realized about a 58% increase in property value. So you look from 2007 at $70,922,000, 2016, which is our last available numbers, at $112 million, plus that's a 58% increase in our property values over that 10-year period. I call your attention to the bottom line number, which is our millage, and that was from 93.9, stayed constant as we moved over to about 2013, 2014, moved up to that 97.8. Being able to recognize great property value increases as a result of investment that the private sector, residential, commercial, and industrial has been making in our community, we've been able to continue to grow our community, provide higher levels of service, but continue to do that at relatively the same millage rate. And we've been very successful with that. Budget growth and millage rate, I think it's important for us annually to come back and take a look at that. Budget growth over the 10-year period may sound high, but it's a 39% increase over a 10-year period. So if we annualize that, obviously that's a 3.9% increase. That is equivalent to, actually a little bit below, growth plus CPI. So we've been able, over this 10-year period, to be able to manage our budgets in ways that we are staying within that growth plus CPI that our state legislature has asked that we stay in relative to increases to millage. It's an option that you always have under Act 388, but you have not exercised. You haven't needed to increase millage relative to growth plus CPI. Even when we have 3-year look-backs, it isn't something that we've needed to do. Millage, on the other hand, over the 10 years, 5%. A 5% increase in millage over the same period that brought in a 39% increase to the overall budget. But if you look at it over the last 7 years, that is a 0% increase in your millage rate. 97.8 mills since 2011, and we are proposing in this budget that we would maintain that at that same rate. CPI plus growth, we just got those numbers last Friday. Our growth rate for this year, or for 2016 actually, because they operate a year in arrears, State Census Bureau is estimating that as of the end of 2016, we were at 29,000 residents. That was a 2.33% increase in population from 2015 to 16. We know that this past year we had our largest housing start in the history of the city. We will surpass 30,000 plus as we get the data for 2017, and we know that that'll happen. But even at 2013 numbers at 2.33, CPI came in this year at 1.26%. State legislature gives us growth plus CPI. It would allow us a 3.59% increase to our millage under state statute. That would have allowed you to do a 3.51 mill adjustment. Again, we are not recommending that we make any adjustment to our millage to be able to satisfy the budget that we have proposed to us.
Ed, how far back can we go to grab it if we need it?
For CPI plus growth? I guess to the enactment of 388?
Yeah, it's 3 years.
How many years can we go back? It's a 3-year look back. They give us the ability to recapture up to 3 years. So for us in a really bad situation, that would probably be somewhere around 10% over a 3-year period. Because we had no CPI last year, 0.25, 24.
I had to use a portion of the 3-year look back the last time we went through reassessment. But that was at least, I think that was about 3 years ago, so we're back to about 100% of the 3-year look back.
So
That would be about 10%.
About a 10%, yeah. And of course, under Act 388, the 10% simply means that that's what you could do by simple majority. To override that has to be by a 3/4 majority of council, supermajority. So again, well operating within the boundaries of what our state legislature had hoped that we would be doing. Many of our counterparts around the state are having to exercise that growth plus CPI. We have just been able to do that off of the really good growth that's happened to our property values over this period as well. Property tax millage, I think it's important that we always take a look at that. Again, since 2011, we've been at that 97.8, so those do not really change. If you're in a $100,000 home, it costs you $391.20 to live inside the city limits of Greer. It's twice that if it's a $200,000 home. So again, it's relative to value. And it's directly related to the value of a meal. The value of a meal for us this year is estimated at $117,505. And our millage, at that millage rate, should generate a little bit, just right under $11.5 million in property tax income, ad valorem income. So again, as our property values increase, the value of a mill increases as well. Because we look at ad valorem taxes and the business license revenue, thought it was important for us to see what's been happening. You see we're starting to get a bit of an S-shaped curve relative to local business license, a little more erratic on the Municipal Association of South Carolina's income. That can happen for a variety of reasons. It's usually because of litigation, or it's because of some extended settlement that the Municipal Association may have with someone like an AT&T, where it's millions and millions of dollars that are being redistributed throughout the state, and they make an agreement on behalf of all municipalities on how that's going to be accomplished. But we've been able to recognize really good income. You'll see there, particularly on the red line, when we look at budgeted for 2017, we were probably too conservative. To Mr. Bettis's point and the question he was asking earlier, is we try to very intentionally anticipate that those dollars will be less than what we really believe they actually could come in at. So by doing that, what you'll see happens is that you start to get those types of variations in the graph, whereas while we do not have control of the collection or the distribution of those license fees that come from the Municipal Association, what we do have control over is what we project we will collect. And so that's why you see that dip in proposed 2017 versus or budgeted 2017, and then what we're proposing in 2018. It gives us the ability to weather the storms when our commercial development isn't as strong as we would sometimes hope that it would be, or wish that it would be, or even would plan for it to be. It gives us the ability to weather that a little bit more. And that's what that is demonstrating. When we look at our budgeted expenditures, this graph demonstrates what we do know, that almost 92%, 91.87% of our budget is related to personnel and operations. Personnel, operations, and debt is really what we do. Personnel is because we are a service organization. Everything that we go out and do, whether it's police, fire, courts, recreation, assisting customers at a counter or on the telephone, we are a customer service providing entity. The product that we provide is service. Get the garbage picked up, get the streets repaired, answer a service call, whether again it's police, fire, or any other type of service. So we monitor this very closely. We monitor all of our comparison groups as well. When we do your workshop in February, one of the things that we look at every single year is where we compare among our peer groups around the state. and we continue to pair well in that. One of the things that we're recognizing and that we see is certainly happening here, did the sound change?
I think so.
Okay, it was either that or
On reverb.
I was like, what is that? So we monitor that very, very closely because, one, we know it's of interest to you, and it is an important management tool for us. We are always trying to look at that balance between where we are and how we're comparing to ourselves, and that balance of where we are and how we are comparing to contemporaries, other similar organizations, particularly in South Carolina, and how we compare to that. The next pie chart really is showing how we distribute those dollars, where our services are provided. You can see public safety is a big part of that, and police and fire. General government operations is coming in there as well. The next graph may show you a little more to demonstrate where those dollars. Our highest department budget, I don't believe would be a surprise, is our police department. Coming in number 2 is general government operations. Number 3 is our fire department. 4 is parks and recreation. 5 is city administration. 6 is building and development standards. 7 is public services. 8 is municipal court. And 9 is our most well-managed, lowest expense cost to the city, mayor and council. So, exactly, as we would expect that to be. We demonstrate that for you not because any one of these has more importance to us, and that's one of the things that is so important to us as we talk with our team about this concept of Team Greer. There is no service that we provide to our constituents that is more important than another. Some have different resources. And so the allocation of those resources and the expense of providing those levels of service obviously differentiate how we need to budget. So we have different levels of staffing, we have different types of expenses that are associated with each of those. But these are where our dollars are spread each and every year. Again, from a policy perspective, it's important for us that we're on track with this in line with what you believe we should be doing. And this is, you would see that this is tied, again, directly to our comprehensive plan. It would be directly related to our strategic plan, and it certainly would be involved in the work plans that are coming out of our respective departments. That's why it's important that we review this during the budget process. We review it annually during the council strategic planning session, as well as we are reviewing that monthly through your reporting system. This is the policy part of us allocating those resources where you believe it is appropriate that we do that through, again, through the budget process. I wanted to come back and spend a little bit of time looking at this issue of our budget and the relationship that our staffing levels have relative to that budget as well. You can see as the budget has continued to grow, we don't see the exact same proportionate share of the budget relative to those personnel costs. So what that says, what I think is noteworthy here, is that because you won't see that red line in direct relationship to the blue line, that means that we're being able to allocate dollars to debt, which may be projects, construction, facilities, or being able to allocate those dollars to operations. So while you will see those percentage numbers changing somewhat, what we want to watch from a management perspective, what I'm looking at on a monthly basis, is I'm particularly watching the gap. I'm watching what happens between what we're spending overall and what we're spending relative to the cost of our people. One thing that I think is important as well is that while we will run these numbers based on our budgeted numbers, seldom at the end of the year have we expended 100% of those resources at year end. Because at our staffing level now, and just, where we are in our size and a matter of attrition and growth, we find that even in a new budget process, it takes us a while to hire new people. So we'll budget from July 1 to June 30th. We have some room in there, so typically that gives us about a 2% buffer. So if we're looking at 63% or 64.24, those numbers are actually coming in at about 2% below that, because again, we're comparing actual versus budget. Again, I'm not trying to split hairs with that, other than to show that we are monitoring that. We are watching that very, very closely to make sure that we are staying in the areas that we think we need to. Personnel costs as a percentage of budget, about a 2% growth this year. But in our budget, it's important to note that we have an expense that is directly related to our personnel that we have absolutely no control over, and that is to our state retirement system. All of our employees participate in the South Carolina retirement system or the South Carolina police officers retirement system, which is for all of our public safety employees. 2% is required this year to be contributed to that program. I'll have some additional information on that in a moment. But to budget 2% just for that purpose was a significant hit for us this year. About $211,000 was required for us to satisfy the state mandate of that 2% increase. Our budget this year does provide for a step increase for our employees. That is our salary and wage program that we implemented a few years ago. In that system, over a 30-year period, employees would progress through a step system. So we have a range, a minimum, a mid, and max in that system, and our employees are able to move through it. Our budget does allow for our employees to receive a step. It'll be evaluated based on their merit, and the budget also allows for a CPI increase, a cost of living increase, which is at that published 1.26% amount. Again, those numbers are in there, and they are both based on merit. One of the things that this budget also includes this year that we've been trying for a number of years to do was to fund holiday compensation, holiday pay compensation for particularly for our public safety employees. We would have a few other employees that would be affected by this as well, but it's primarily our public safety employees that are affected by holidays. In that, if we close city operations on Thanksgiving, the office is closed. City Hall is closed. Parks and Recreation is closed. Our office operations close. But we do not have the ability to close public safety. So public safety employees work on holidays. If they don't work on the holiday, then if they work on the holiday, then they have to take that day somewhere else. If they weren't scheduled to work on that day, then they're taking that day somewhere else. Well, you can imagine in our environment what that creates for our supervisors in having to schedule people on shift working around employees that are now having to take holidays that they've earned but were not able to receive before. Again, for a number of years, we've been trying to work through a system where if you're in a public safety environment, you work the holiday, you're paid the day you work, and you're paid for your holiday. Those employees that are not scheduled, instead of them being given additional days off for that earned holiday, that we would compensate them for that day as well. We have been able to incorporate that cost into this budget. We've been working toward that for about 7 years and have just gotten to the point we were able to do it for 3 days for our public safety employees, and now we've been able to get the budget to the point that we're able to do it across the board. This will tremendously help our department heads and our supervisors in scheduling, making sure that we have full shifts for police and fire protection so that we're not constantly trying to schedule people out. We already have to schedule them out for sick leave, if that's an issue, and we have to schedule around them for their annual leave. It's the holiday leave that was adding an additional challenge for us, and the budget enables us to be able to meet that need. I do want to give full disclosure that in being able to do those personnel items that I discussed, particularly being able to pay the 2% of payroll for our employees, it required us to do a reallocation of our current millage. As you are aware, there is a provision in our millage that provided for 2 meals to go to fund balance replenishment. And we had a policy that once we got to a certain level that we would want to consider how we would deal with those meals. We could either you could take those meals off, you could reallocate those meals, you could do something else. You may find that there was another need for those. For us to be able to maintain at 97.8 meals, it was necessary for us to take the expense of that unfunded mandate for our retirement contribution. It was necessary for us to take those 2 meals and allocate those to that unfunded mandate. So I want to make sure that there's no miscommunication about that previously of our 97.82 went to fund balance replenishment. I am proposing and have pulled that out of fund balance replenishment and have allocated those 2 meals to pay for the retirement system requirement. And that certainly is open for debate and discussion, but I wanted you to be aware of how I have proposed to do that.
So we're not doing any fund balance replenishment in this budget?
No. This budget does not have an income of ad valorem tax that is going specifically to fund balance replenishment. We have been fortunate the last few years that we have still been contributing above and beyond those 2 meals to fund balance. We believe that we should have the ability to continue that as long as our development stays strong. But the economy doesn't do that, it becomes tighter. But we do believe that we have replenished fund balance to a point. I won't say that, I think 35% is the balance, is the fund balance. We have reached that 35, but as you are aware, we're spending down some fund balance on some large projects, so we will dip below that 35 again. It is my hope that by managing our expenses and hoping that our revenues would come in stronger than maybe we are projecting them to do. If our economy stays strong, we will still see that as we would drop below that 35, that we would see some increases to fund balance anyway, just as a matter of operating with revenues higher than expenditures at year end.
You're going to leave those 2 meals funding retirement?
I am leaving those 2 meals funding the general fund. Retirement is in the overall expenses, but it's the reason that I needed, because I did not want to come to council and propose a 2-meal increase to fund retirement contributions. I could have, and if it is council's position that unfunded mandate that we are being required to fund, if it would be better for us to do that, that is certainly an option. It just isn't what I'm proposing in the budget. But I certainly did consider that we would continue to build our fund balance so that we are able to be in a well-positioned capacity going forward, and that $211,000 that $211,000 that is required to fund the retirement system contribution, that it be made up with a potential millage increase that would have been within our 3.51 allowed number. So the reason I wanted to give that, and I said full disclosure, I want council to be aware that you have options. I'm making a proposal to you and I'm recommending the budget, and I think it works in this fashion, but council certainly has the option to do that differently. My biggest concern is that it's 2% this year, but it continues to grow. And I wanted to make sure that I shared that with you as well. The changes to the employer and employee contributions that will be effective July 1, 2017, directly from the state, it says the employer contribution rate for the South Carolina retirement system and the police officer retirement system increases by 2% to 13.5% and 16.24% respectively. Non-public safety employees under state retirement system, it goes to 13.56. All employees in public safety that are under the police officer's retirement system, it goes to 16.24, July 1, 2017. The employer rates will continue to increase annually by 1% through July 1, 2022. So we will see a 1% increase to that cost each year until it reaches the maximum amount of 18.56% under the South Carolina retirement system and 21.24% under the police officer's retirement system. So we're going to continue to see 1% of payroll each year, 2% in year one, 1% a year for the next 5 years. And we have to determine how we are best positioned to be able to address that. While the employer is also having an increase to what we are contributing for those retirement systems, our employees will also pay an additional amount. The employee contribution rate for the state retirement system increases to and is capped at 9%. It's currently 8.66, I believe, David. 8.66? I think it's 8.66. It'll go to 9, and the employee contribution for the police officer's retirement system increases and is capped at 9.75%. So when this caps out, we as the employer will be putting in 18.56% of salary. The employer will be putting in 9. Police officer's retirement system, we're contributing 21.24, and the employee is contributing 9.75.
And that gap's going to get bigger. There's no way around it.
Well, the gap would get bigger if all things remain the same. But I would believe that our operations, as our city continues to grow, what we have to be very careful is that, you're absolutely right. I mean, all things staying the same, that number would get larger. What we have to be careful in managing is to not let that go to 70, 75.
We've already let it get to 64.
Well, but
We've had really good growth.
And we've had really good growth. Yes. Now, with all due respect, I would take the way that you said that is that 64 is a bad place to be. By comparison, 64 is a really good place to be. Our counterparts are in 70, 75, 78%. We're at 64. We've managed it so well that now that we have because the 2% made us go to 64. We went from 62, where we were a year ago, to 64. What we would hope is that as we would continue to grow, our overall budget would continue to grow, and as the property values of the city continues to grow, that would not force it to be a 1% increase on an annual basis. But to your point, Mr. Bettis, you're absolutely right. All things remaining the same, that would grow by 1% a year.
Well, and as we spend down our fund balance, you can't throw money at both of them. I mean, if we spend all our money on projects and we're funding... And I would never recommend to you that you would fund retirement out of fund balance, because that is a recurring expense, and we've lived that. Our budgets do not
we never put fund balance into recurring expenses. We put them to capital projects, one-time expenditures. But the moment we start using fund balance to pay payroll or payroll expenses or operational expenses, we will deplete our fund balance over time if that is our practice. And so we caution ourselves continuously that that is not a practice that we would recommend. It's a recipe for disaster ultimately.
But what I'm hearing you say is you're hoping that our future budgets will allow us to maintain a high fund balance as well as fund retirement.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of hope. We were hoping back in 2006 and 2007 that it kept on doing what it was doing.
And I think alternatively that we would sit back and do nothing. And that's the difficult part in this decision, is that I think that we are well positioned that if we fall into hard economic times, we have the ability to monitor and adjust. We've done it before, we will do it again. But I don't believe it's appropriate for us not to continue to move the city forward when our economy is moving forward.
I agree with that, but we're getting ready to do some major stuff, we hope.
Yes.
And I'd hate to get halfway down the road and figure out, we might not be able to do all this, you know?
There are no projects that we have discussed or proposed or that we've looked at funding through our available resources or through the ability to bond that we do not currently have the capacity to do. The only one of those would be the project that is the walking trail bike system plan that we've stepped back and said, if as a community we want to do that and move forward, we will have to look at alternative ways to fund that the current revenue stream isn't sufficient to do the other things that we've identified and that. And so it's not proposed. And the budget does not reflect that because of that, for that reason. But your point is well made, that we will have recurring expenses relative to our operations, relative to our personnel that are going to increase. But the same would be said if we stayed exactly where we are and we continue to provide a step increase in our pay system, or we tried to fund a CPI increase. Any type of increase in our current expenses will have the exact same effect. The cost of us doing business will continue to be higher. But even in our worst economic times, as we were coming out of that, we immediately had growth. As the bottom fell out for everyone, and we immediately had growth moving back up. All of our data demonstrates that we came out of that quicker and more robust than almost anyone. And I think that happened for a couple of reasons. One, I think that we are in a strong economic environment in upstate South Carolina. I think that's a big part of it. But I think the other is that we were well positioned to make operational decisions that allowed us to reduce our expenses so that we didn't keep spending money that wasn't coming in. And what I'm saying is that we get that, we understand it, and if we're taking on additional expense because of growth, if growth doesn't occur, then the expenses don't occur. We make adjustments there as well, and we do that at any point we have to. Well, you teed me up to I said up, not off. This budget does indeed, we are making recommendations for some additional staffing in this budget. We have talked about much of our growth and the impact it is having on our operations. We've brought departmental reports, monthly reports, so that you could see what those activity levels are like. And we've tried to be very diligent in managing our resources. When I met with our department supervisors, with our department heads, initially, and we look at things as FTEs, full-time equivalents, so sometimes 2 part-time positions can equal 1 full-time, but there were requests in our budget from our departments for 17 FTEs in this budget. I think all 17 of those were legitimate requests, but I did not believe that we could fund 17 positions in this budget. It's a balanced budget that doesn't require additional resources. But what I am proposing in this budget are 12 and a half FTEs, and I wanted to share with you what those are. In this budget, I am recommending to you 2 Uniform Patrol Officer 1 positions. Originally, there were 4 that were requested. I am recommending that 2 of those be funded. This budget has an additional detention officer in the budget. There are resources for telecommunications that is the equivalent of a part-time position. And those are all in the police department. In the fire department, we are recommending a deputy fire marshal position to be added to our workforce because of the volume of work that needs to take place there and the number of inspections that we're able to be able to conduct. In our Public Services Department, we're needing to prepare for some transition in our staff in that department, and I am recommending that the equivalent of a part-time position be allowed for us to have some additional resources for an administrative assistant in that department. You may recall that for many, many years we operated that department with 2 administrative assistants. We trimmed that down to 1 a number of years ago, but the work volume is such that it certainly justifies that we need some additional resources there, and I'm proposing that we would ramp up to that with a part-time. Our Recreation Department, I am recommending the creation of an events coordinator position with our event staff, primarily to coordinate weddings. Weddings have become a big business for us, and it is a large part of our revenue stream for our rental facilities. And we need to be able to give customized service to our planners and to our brides, and we're recommending that. We're also recommending 2 groundskeeper positions. We are taking on more property. We will be developing the auditorium site as a park site. We have more area that we are currently maintaining. We believe if we're going to build facilities and improve facilities, we need to dedicate the resources to maintain those facilities. So the budget includes 2 groundskeeper 1 positions. There's also a part-time administrative clerk to assist in the recreation department. Anytime that we have to, that we do registrations or any of the work that comes in through the office there, we are having to pull program staff off if our clerk is not there, if our administrative assistant is not there. So we're needing some relief and some assistance there. One of the areas that we have seen the most significant volume change in daily flows of work is in our Building and Development Standards Office. I am recommending the creation of an inspector position. Also, an equivalent part-time position for inspector, part-time, and code enforcement during the high season area, high grass growing season on the code enforcement side. I shared with you a month or so ago that we did a trial with moving a permit technician over into building development standards, handling the flow of our permits. That has worked really well for us. We'll be able to process those permits more efficiently. So we are proposing that that position would be there. And then also in building development standards, we need some assistance on the engineering side. That would be primarily so that our city engineer can also manage the department as well as manage all engineering operations, but we need some day-to-day engineering resources that we've been lacking for quite some time and having to farm out a good bit of our work. There's another need within building development standards, but we're trying to meet that with some contract work, and that is in plan review. We are farming out a fair amount, a large amount of our plan review work, and that is necessary because of the volume of plan reviews and the complexity of those plan reviews. We are doing plan reviews for million square foot facilities, manufacturing facilities. We are doing large commercial projects, and we certainly have to make sure that both our fire marshal and our building official are doing those plan reviews so that those facilities are being built to code and they're being built correctly, and then providing resources to do the inspections when those properties are coming online as well. The largest area of revenue, the largest growth area of revenue has been through our Building and Development Standards Office. They have been struggling for some time. So again, of the 17 positions that are proposed, I am recommending to you 12 and a half FTEs, and those will move around a little bit. But I do believe that they are necessary for us to continue to provide the same levels of service that we're providing.
So total in the building?
Building development standards, it is 1, 2, 3 full-time equivalents. It's 2 full-time positions, 2 part-time, but 3 FTEs and resources being placed in contract work for plan review.
Count that as a person?
No, I don't. Well, because if we don't have the plans to review, we're not spending the money. It is a direct relationship to, and that was one of the reasons that I'm trying to keep it on the contract side, is that if the large projects don't happen over this next year, I don't have a person on staff that's doing that. We're contracting that out on an as-need basis. So if it's not happening, I'm not sending the work out.
And how many total again then?
Total is 12 and a half, 12.5.
No, I mean just in building total.
3. 2 full-time, 2 part-time, but 3 FTEs.
So you have 1 inspector, 1 part-time code enforcement?
No, well, it's a full-time equivalent. 2 part-times is 1 FTE. I mean, that's why I'm trying, because we are allocating resources in all of our departments so that they are able to continue to work. The Parks and Recreation, for example, we're providing resources for part-time help that's there as well. So we continue to do that, but anytime that amount of money reaches the equivalent of a full-time salary, then we count that as either as a 0.5 or 1 FTE. I hope that makes sense, but
I'm just looking for bodies.
you're looking for,
Yeah.
There would be more bodies than there are FTEs. Because, for example, I could hire 4 quarter-time people,
Right.
and when I can do that, that's a good thing to do. So anytime that I can use part-time resources, that is a cost savings to us because it is more expensive to have a full-time employee than it is to have any equivalent part-time because of insurance.
I was going to say, what kind of benefits do the part-times get?
They don't.
No retirement or anything?
No. Well, they could have retirement, but
Over a certain wage, right? I mean, over a certain...
yeah, or if they participated in the system in the past and they say, I want to participate in the system, then we have to enroll in the system. And then over a certain amount of hours as well.
The latest rule, I guess about a year ago, was the retirement system required regular part-time employees to be included in the plan. Seasonal part-time are not.
Correct.
So regular part-time
Seasonal versus
are
regular.
required to be in the plan.
You're adding to the retirement amount, even part-time people.
Well, we are, and we've accounted for it. I mean, we're...
I'm just saying that's what makes that-
It is. You're absolutely correct. You know, it is a relationship between people and the cost for that benefit. Absolutely. Questions about that?
I have a quick question.
Okay.
I've come in several times over the past few weeks, and I noticed at the front desk, they've just been covered up, a lot of people being pulled from different departments to help. I understand there's been some temporary staffing.
Yes.
Is that, obviously, you know, these weather events that we're having are out of the ordinary. I mean, is that the way we're going to continue to just kind of redirect when we need them, or?
I would not hire staff because I believe, just because we've had a hailstorm each year over the last 2 years, I'm not projecting that we're going to have a hailstorm in year 3. Does that make, I mean, so in that case, I would rather be prepared to use temporary part-time labor at an unbudgeted expense because I have an unbudgeted revenue as a result of that event. We had no idea that we were going to have the hailstorm, but it has generated a lot of revenue because of the permit process, coming in and getting permits and license. And so what I've done, what we've elected to do, is provide that relief so that we don't have these backlogs in issuing permits, because a person who needs to get a roof on their house doesn't need to wait 3 weeks to get a permit from the city. We had to get the resources allocated, but those permit fees that were coming in that we didn't expect we were going to get, I've taken those dollars and we're paying those expenses. So yes, we will go over budget on some payroll expenses for temporary labor, but we will also go over budget on revenue that we weren't expecting as well as a result of it. So we're just balancing out. That's how we hope that would work out. Obviously, all of our department heads are here. That's why they're back here. They are prepared to answer any questions that you have concerning their staffing needs, their justification for that. As we work through this process, we know that tonight isn't the only opportunity to ask questions. We know that we're going to get those questions over the next couple of weeks. We know we're going to get those when you do first reading. We're going to get those when you do second reading. We just want to make sure that we're giving you all the information so that we are prepared to answer those questions. But if you have any questions relative to those staffing requests, all of those folks are here this evening, and they are prepared to answer any of those questions that you may have. So I'm going to...
Could you give us all the new positions?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 and a half. 12 and a half, yes, sir.
You're talking about 17.
17 were requested.
Okay.
17 were requested. The budget I am proposing to you has 12 and a half of those 17. So yeah, there are a few disappointed folks behind me. Because they made really good justification for they did. But to have a balanced budget, I wasn't prepared to put 17 in the budget and come to you and ask for a $3.5 million increase to fund the difference between 12 and a half and 17. I am willing to ask for the 17, for the 12 and a half, because I can do it within the resources that we have available to us today. And so that's how, in all honesty, we backed into that number. They asked for 17, we were able to fund 12 and a half. And that's what we did. The last information on that relative to what you're seeing here. Last year, when we brought the budget to you for 2017, that budget had a 9.8% increase. Still were able to maintain it to 97.8 mils. It was a little over a $2 million increase last year. This year, we've been able to have some success in managing that better. While we have gone up to almost 24.2 million, the increase is a smaller increase in proportion And as a result of that, it is a 3% reduction in growth to the budget than we had 1 year ago. And we feel really good about that. We are increasing property values at a rate higher than we are growing expenses. And that's where we would want to be. That is a good place for us to be. And so in reassessment years, in both Spartanburg and in Greenville, that we have every 5 years, for us we're affected every 3 to 5 years, as a result of those reassessments, as those property values are increasing at a rate higher than our increase in expenses, we're able to continue to grow our city without having to look for additional resources like fees, taxes, and millage. But we're able to do it. It's based on where we are today. And if things happen that we're not anticipating, then we have to monitor and adjust for those. But I feel really good about this budget. I feel really good that we're able to bring a $24.2 million budget to you, that we're able to provide increased benefits to our employees. We're able to make adjustments to our salary, our compensation program. We are able to add additional personnel to meet the demands for providing the service levels that our constituents require of us, and we're able to do that in a balanced budget. So we feel really good about the budget that we brought to you, but we also recognize that as a policy, you may choose to say we need to do things a little bit different. And we're very open to that. We just want to make sure that we're communicating the rationale of what we've provided to you and why we've done that.
What kind of health insurance increase you anticipate?
Zero. Our health insurance program, we believe that we will be able to maintain the same level of insurance, and we'll do that with no increase in premium to either the employee contribution or to the family contribution by employees.
On an individual basis.
On an individual basis, yeah.
There will be growth based on employee growth, but the individual cost does not go up.
Questions about our general fund, Fund 11. What I do encourage you over the next couple of weeks is that you go through the printout, you look at line item changes, any questions that you have relative to this budget. Your finance staff is available to you. I am available to you. We have the ability that we could schedule additional workshop time if that's needed, but there certainly is opportunity as you go into first reading for any modifications to the budget or questions to be answered. Again, we want to do that. After tonight, we will be posting the proposed budget to our website so that the general public has that. Steve, I'm not sure exactly when you're posting it, but after tonight. So that is out there for the general public to see as well.
What's the average cost of the Sunday ABC license?
The cost of it,
Yeah, what's the average cost for that license? Do you know?
I don't know.
There's basically two levels based on the times, the length of time that they buy the license for. One is about $1,500, one's about $3,500. We're bringing in, not a whole lot of money on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, 27,000. Yeah. I think we're at 32,600 right now. And that's just recently come in, and I did that projection on the 27,000, a month ago. So we've, exceeded that to date. We've had more restaurants out there getting that Sunday sales.
Seems like it'll be more than that, but
Ed, what do we do with the volunteer firefighters? I remember we were a program or something like that.
Keith, you want to address how you're running that program?
There's like accuracy, I apologize. So what we have is, when I got here, we had a handful of volunteers. They actually had all transitioned into a part-time. We're paying them to come in and backfill and things like that. So it's just easier and cleaner for us to put them all under salaries, the main salaries. So those are included in there as well. So now we have 2 of those individuals that still remain from that previous time period, volunteers, and then switched over to part-time.
We don't have volunteers anymore.
We don't.
We said something about getting rid of them some years ago.
We haven't gotten rid of anybody.
That's called attrition.
So we have continued them on, and they do help us fill some of those spots when we have vacancies and stuff like that, so they come in and help us.
This new deputy fire marshal fall in the hierarchy over there.
Who will they fall under?
What's the structure going to be like over there?
It's going, that person, no sir, that person will actually report to Scott Keeley.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's his division, and he's over that as well as administration side of the department. So he helps with the planning. We're going through strategic planning process right now, those kind of things.
So that will give us 3 in that?
3 total, yes, sir. Scott has been doing a lot more of the plan review, and also I've put a lot more workload on him. And this position is not solely because of the increase, but it is compounded because of the increase in the workload. One of our concerns is that we, as we continue to grow, we want to try to make sure that we're getting our annual inspections done. And one of the things that we've seen over time is some of these newer buildings that are coming in are requiring more and more time to actually spend. So, I mean, you can't go in and inspect a 2,000 or 4,000 square foot structure, expect that to be the same as a, 500,000 square foot structure. Thank you.
Others?
Okay, may we continue? In our special funds, in your package, you have the funds in numerical order. The first is and we'll look at all of those: contingency fund, recreation program fund, lease purchase fund, debt service fund, hospitality taxes fund, our stormwater fund, real property revolving fund, the sanitation services fund, facilities use fund, and the road paving fund. David and Mike and myself will be assisting with each of those, but we'll start off with the Fund 8. You have that in front of you. David, I think you're going to give some additional information.
Just to get you oriented a little bit to all of these funds, the upper left-hand corner of these budget reports will say the fund name. So, and then the first segment of the digits will be the fund number. So we'll call them by name and by fund number. So beginning with the contingency fund, which is Fund 08, as Mr. Greer has previously stated. Our current financial policy for our contingency fund is to be funded at 1%. Our ordinance reads that it is based on 1% of our prior year's audited results of operations. So you see, last year we funded that at $175,000, and the current year budget is requested and recommended at $35,824. That is the incremental difference, adjusting for the total of 1% based on fiscal year 2016 audited results of operations, to get that up to 1% of last year's audited numbers. We'll be funding that in this budget year, fiscal 18. Any questions on the contingency fund?
What do you mean 1% of the audited number?
When we do our audit for any fiscal year, so our most recent audit was fiscal year 16. As part of that audit, it says, in the general fund, you've spent $22 million. 1% of that will be transferred in a subsequent fiscal year to the contingency fund to cover any emergencies that may arise to, cover those expenses that will be unexpected.
But that's not 1%. I'm sorry, 22 million.
Well, that was a hypothetical number. Yeah. This is the 35 plus the 175.
Yeah, the 175 from the prior year was already transferred. The 35 is added to the 175. That cumulative total is 1% of our audited operations.
Okay.
Yes.
You're combining those
Sorry.
two numbers.
Yes, because that 175 has been transferred and is already held in the cash account, strictly in reserve for contingency.
Okay. And you're saying, based on what you were talking about earlier, this is not going to be funded in this budget?
The 35,000 is, yes.
35,000 is, okay, but we're not doing the 1% this time? That's not what
No, it is 1%.
It's 1%. The 175 plus the 35 is 1%.
Right, I got you.
The 175 was based off of fiscal year 15 audit, and we had to fund the full 1%. Then that 175,000 is sitting in the cash account, and then we had the fiscal year 16 audit. That 1% equals what these two numbers are added together. So we had to supplement just the difference to get it up to 1%.
Just for clarity again, so you said the 2 mills are going towards the retirement system based on your recommendation, and
What I'm saying is I'm no longer funding 2 mills exclusively to fund balance replenishment. Now, I could have said those 2 mills were used for anything that would have equaled $235,000. But that's what drove it. That 2% increase directly, because it's an unfunded mandate, it was, in my opinion, the most appropriate place to show where that shifted. But it can be applied to any overall expense, but that expense equals the 2 mills. Recreation Program Fund is Fund 09. David?
Yeah, as you're familiar with this fund, the Recreation Programs Fund is mainly for registrations to run the programs of the Recreation Department, so that is program registration dollars in and an equal portion of program dollars out on the expense side. There are no major changes programmatically in this fund. We did make one change, allocating some personnel costs to be funded out of the Recreation Programs Fund to help cover the cost for part-time staff to cover athletic events. The total amount for the budget for Fund 09, the Recreation Programs Fund for fiscal year 18, is recommended at $229,800. Any questions there?
Fund 10 is our lease purchase capital improvement fund. One of those that we've seen, one of our larger shifts in our funds this year. Both David and Mike have some additional information on that.
As you've been on council for a number of years, you're aware that this fund does tend to be cyclical, that in some years the amount that we borrow to run this capital equipment lease purchase fund is lower, and in some years it is higher. This particular year, it is one of the higher years as we are replacing some of our long-term assets. I do not intend to go through every asset, but I do want to cover just real high-level categories. We have 6 categories of assets that make up about $2.2 million of the $2.4 million that are requested in this lease purchase capital equipment fund. Following this up, Mike will be offering some further details on the vehicle and vehicle equipment in amount of $1.2 million. In the finance department, we are recommending replacement of our financial software for $145,000. In building development standards, they have been struggling with the software that we have for their permitting process, recommending replacing their software there in the building development standards for $412,000. We have several upgrades to the Cannon Center and to 3 conference rooms, 2 at City Hall and 1 in the Recreation Department for $88,000. They'll be upgrading those conference rooms. We have some significant needs in our core network that supplies all our IT functions across the city, and in our data network storage. Replacing that is about $152,000 across the city. And then in the police department and fire department, the last biggest item here is them moving to the Palmetto 800 system. And between the 2 departments, that is $224,000. So that is just the 6 high-level categories of where we are proposing the spending the dollars for this lease purchase fund.
$112,000 for financial software?
412, that was the building development standard software.
And yours was how much?
145.
Wow.
We
That's good stuff.
It is, software is, both of these are greatly improving our efficiencies and providing capabilities that we do not have today. And we've been looking at software for probably about 2 years in both departments, and have finally settled down on, these products, and they can be very expensive, yes.
Does it replace people?
Advance additional people. Makes them more efficient.
Makes the ones we have more efficient.
David, is the depreciation schedule any different on the equipment that's purchased under a lease purchase program than a direct purchase? And what is the depreciation schedule on, I guess, what I call hard machinery as opposed to software? I mean, is there a difference?
The depreciation schedules are really set by the IRS code.
Yeah.
And the tax code. So the bigger assets, trucks, street sweepers, leasing machines, those have a 10-year depreciation life. And software and computer equipment typically is 3 years, but when you're talking dollars like this, and for the length of service that they provide, right now, the current software system we have in finance has been 15 years. When you get to that level of software, these are being depreciated over 10. And then all the other assets are at 5.
Renovation, fire department.
Bigger door to get that new truck in.
That is a whole list of stuff, Mr. Bettis.
Just a project or something.
No, sir.
Would you like a further explanation?
You got a short answer? Yes. It is not for the door. It's actually for several other needs we have. Whenever I shared the annual report, I identified that we had several maintenance issues that we need to address. That's what all that's for. The laundry list. Yes, sir.
And is that the $115,000 you're looking at in the lease purchase? Okay, that is not funded in lease purchase because those assets are not qualified for lease purchase. We have funded them in the real property fund. So that would be a cash item.
I wondered when I saw renovation.
You've gotten ahead.
That why it's not under the...
You've jumped ahead.
So it's not a qualifying lease purchase asset. They are funded elsewhere.
Mr. Searle? Thank you. As David mentioned, I'm going to address the vehicle purchases that are in the capital equipment fund. As council will recall, last year, we reduced the amount of vehicles that we brought into the inventory so we could age our fleet a little bit, get a little bit more depreciation out of some of our equipment. The typical practice for us is to, for whatever comes in, there's something that goes out. But just to make council fully aware of what's contained in the budget as far as a high-level perspective, well, we are asking in here is for 20 vehicles. There's 12 going out. There's 2 vehicles that are high-dollar-in vehicles that I'll discuss separately in the Public Services Department that are coming in without something going out to replace them, and I'll talk about why. And then we have 5 vehicles that are tied to the positions that we're bringing in. For this budget, we're bringing in 1 vehicle to actually fill a need for a position that was budgeted last year that we did not provide a vehicle for, that we just hired a month and a half ago, so a business license inspector. So that vehicle's coming in without one going out. But I did want to take a few minutes to go department to department just to kind of look at where those vehicles are and what the plans are for them. If council will take a look at the very first page is page 1 of 1, but starting on the individual line items of page 1 of 9, everything's broken down by department. The first department is administration, where we have 2 vehicles that we're wanting to bring in. As I mentioned, one will be being brought in to help with the business license inspector, and then an additional vehicle is going to be brought in to replace the Impala that's in the current inventory. That Impala is actually going to be transferred to courts, and the fleet Impala that they have is going to be gov-dealed. So it will go out, but we're transferring a vehicle over to them. The same year, but there's a lot fewer miles on the Impala that we have in the administration fleet. We're approaching almost 100,000 miles on the other one, and we need to get it out while we still can get something out of it. So that's for those 2 vehicles right now. That's on the very first line item. So you look under the first line item of each of these sections is for the vehicles. This is the one that is 00322, and the last 3 digits are all 000, but it's those last 5 numbers I'll refer to. And so 2 vehicles at $48,000 in administration. And then skipping to page 3 of 9 in the fire department, it's the middle gray bar toward the bottom, very first line item for vehicles. Again, they're all 00322. This particular vehicle is in relation to the deputy fire marshal that's being asked for a vehicle for that particular position. $24,592 budgeted for that particular vehicle. So there will not be a corresponding vehicle coming out. We just recently disposed of, as council will recall, one of the vehicles that we provided to Tiger River, Fire Department. That vehicle went out in the current budget that we're in. On page 4 of 9, there's not a gray bar, but if you go starting from the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down, this line item is 00921. The vehicle equipment, excuse me, I'm still on fire. That's still fire. No. Just fire. What is...
That was the number of vehicle equipment you just read, and that's still in the fire.
That is vehicle equipment, correct. Thank you, Mayor. Your vehicle equipment line item, that is to equip the vehicle 26,250 on that particular vehicle for the fire marshal, deputy fire marshal. And then if you go down to the gray bar toward the bottom for the police department, the vehicles that are listed there are 10 vehicles being asked for by the police department. There are 10 going out. So that's one department where everything that we're bringing in, we're sending something out. in that particular item, $273,812 for those. The way it breaks down, just so you'll know, is that there'll be 6 patrol vehicles that will to be brought in and 6 to go out. There's a new traffic vehicle that we're bringing into the inventory. That vehicle will go to another position in the department. That vehicle is going to be outfitted with a towing option so that we can tow the signs that we have, the digital billboard signs. We currently have a Ford Ranger that's in stock in the police department that's being used for that function. We're going to gov deal that vehicle and send it out. So it will go out, and then we'll probably target 1, maybe 2 vehicles on an annual basis that will be implemented with a towing so that we can have multiple vehicles in the department that can pull that rather than having 1 vehicle dedicated to doing that. And a couple vehicles will be for operational positions, and then we have a request to replace the prisoner transport van. We have some ADA issues with that particular van that we currently have. We're going to keep that van are we keeping the, Chief, are we going to keep the prisoner transport van, or?
Yes, we're going to use that for negotiation function.
One of the negotiations, ERT negotiations, it was asked to bring a vehicle in. Rather than bring a vehicle in for that specifically, we're going to use the existing prisoner transport van for that particular work.
For what now?
The ERT negotiations is a deployment vehicle so that they can operate out of that vehicle while they're on the scene for bringing in, interviewing individuals that are on the scene that they need to interview, also processing tactical information while they're out on a scene for an emergency response.
So it'd just be 9 vehicles going out?
No, it's 10 of 10, because the Ranger is one that's not, we're sending it out because we're bringing in a police vehicle that's going to be outfitted for the towing. Then, if you look on page 5 of 9, on the very first line item is in-car cameras. Go a couple more, then go down toward the very bottom of the page. There's in-car computer modems, vehicle equipment. All those line items are tied to the vehicles that are being brought into the inventory to outfit them.
Obviously, I can't add it up here just from the information we've got, but on a $27,000 police car, how much are we adding to it in equipment by the time we get it fully lettered up, lighted up, computered up, cameraed up?
Per vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously is going to be a $40,000, $50,000 car.
Correct.
At that point. When we take that vehicle out of service, what do we do with all the equipment that's already in it?
Some of the equipment that we currently have in some of the vehicles, if it's still in condition, we'll actually transfer it to the new vehicles and move the equipment around. It doesn't, when we gov deal it, it's not, that equipment's not in there.
Yep.
All right, if you go to page 6 of 9, on the next page, this is the one I want to go into a little bit more detail about. Public Service Department is making a request for a couple of large pieces of equipment. One is a new street sweeper. We've done some research in regards to the current street sweeper that we have. We've had some expenses tied to maintenance and upkeep of that particular piece of equipment over the past couple of years. We started looking at some industry standards to make a determination of what the average life expectancy of a street sweeper is. Currently, our model is a little over 10 years old, or a little under 10 years old. Typically, in that period of time, that you would see about 2,200 to 2,500 hours of operation. Ours is currently sitting at about almost 3,200, mainly because we only have one, and it's doing all the work itself. So it's gotten to the point that we're worried about potential for some major expenses in regards to the vacuum system that's on that particular vehicle. So we're looking at this time going ahead and bringing another street sweeper into the inventory. we're discussing whether to keep the existing one in reserve, and also to be able to possibly provide additional street sweeping more frequently than what we currently do. Of course, it comes down to staffing to be able to do that. So it's possible that after we make a complete evaluation, we may go ahead and try to sell that particular piece of equipment, or we may keep it, and we'll come back to council and let you know one way or the other what we're going to do. But right now, we want to replace or bring in an additional street sweeper.
What is it worth if we sell it, Skipper? Any idea?
No, sir. There's some interest from the dealer to trade, but the late thing now is they don't want to trade money and knock money off the cost. They want to give you that much credit, so you sort of locked in buying equipment from them, for brushes, brooms, and switches and hoses for a period of time. So, like I say, I do not have any idea what it would bring on like a gov deal, so.
You said 3,200 hours, that doesn't seem like a lot, is that not 32,000?
3,200 hours.
Doesn't seem like a lot of hours.
Yeah, it's the run time for, moving down, but 3,200 hours of operation for the motor, that's over a 10-year period, that's about like 30 hours, or about 30 hours, going down the streets that we currently sweep, which that's one of the other items that we have a limited number of streets that we actually go out and do the street sweeping on. We'd like to move that into some extra streets as well. That's one of the reasons why we're looking at possibly keeping an additional street sweeper. I thought the same thing when I was looking it up, but that is the norm. 2,200 hours, 2,300 hours, 2,500 hours over 8, 9, 10-year period is pretty normal for street sweepers out there. I think it's just because they wear out so quick. It's the RPMs that are generated on that motor system are so high that it just creates a lot of stress on it. Whereas you're driving 10 miles an hour, the motor's running at a lot higher rate. For the vacuuming is running at a lot higher rate, so it wears it out pretty quick.
What kind of gas does that thing burn?
I don't know what kind. Probably doesn't get real good gas mileage.
Not very efficient.
Now, keep in mind, that's, it's not the engine necessarily that's driving the truck, it's what we call the pony engine that drives the vacuum system.
Right.
And everything. So like I say.
It's not engaged the whole time.
No, it's not engaged, but it is, as Mike said, highly abrasive material. You're sucking sand up, basically dirt rocks, and it's highly abrasive. The fan impeller, the liner, the housing, the hoses, it's all high abrasive.
Big old shop vac.
Yes, very large.
That's an expensive service to provide per hour.
Beg your pardon?
That is an expensive service to provide per hour. If you just figure out how many hours we get out of the equipment and how much we pay for it.
Yes, sir.
And then also manpower and then dealing with maintenance issues and fuel, and that's a lot.
Don't do it for about a year and see what it points at.
No, I'm not suggesting we don't do it. Just making
Yeah, Mr. Bass, you're right on it. I mean, and that is one of the things that when we did our citizen survey that we actually got some low marks on in regards to street cleanliness. And that was one of the things that we took a look at, trying to make sure that we do a better job. And we've made some adjustments in our strategic plan to try to improve what we're doing in regards to street sweeping. Now, it can be a relative thing, as we know what the perception is on a lot of streets that they may view as being dirty probably aren't city streets. The other line item that's in Skipper's department is in public services, is a request for a new leaf machine with a dump truck. This is a combination type unit to get. The dump truck that's being requested is a larger capacity dump truck, and we've got one dump truck that is a large capacity. This would be in addition to that. It's mainly what they're finding in the department is that they're having to make more frequent trips back to dump leaves and everything, given the volume that we're currently collecting. This is a program that that continues to increase in the amount that we're picking up on an annual basis, mainly because we're adding more properties and more neighborhoods. So the dump truck will come in, and the leaf machine fits onto the dump truck. It hauls the container fits onto it. It pulls the vac system behind it, blows the leaves up into the unit. We're also taking a look at currently keeping the existing leaf machines in stock and not sending something out, mainly to try to determine whether or not we're able to get a little bit more efficient on our leaf pickup during the leaf pickup season in using that equipment. But there is some significant wear and tear on one of the older unit that is causing some concern in regards. It's probably going to need to be replaced. We're looking at, in some cases, I think that, I can't remember if it was this unit or if it was street sweeper, but you spend $40,000 to do motor repairs and things like that. It just starts to make more sense to go ahead and add equipment in there. Those two together equal $140,000 combined. And then finally, I got two more. Parks and Recreation Department. In Parks and Recreation, one of the things in this particular department, there are 3 units that are being requested. There's only one that's actually going to go out. And just to kind of give you some background on what's going on in that department, as council will recall, when we started really getting into the nitty-gritty with the fleet a few years ago, one of the things that we did was we made some aggressive efforts to reduce the number of vehicles that we had that weren't being used. Parks and Recreation is one of those departments that really got cut down to the bone. They currently have absolutely no reserve vehicles in their department. If a vehicle goes down, that means that there is somebody in that department that is not in a truck or a vehicle. So one of the things that we're doing is that with an increase for some additional groundskeeping help, that we want to make sure that we have some reserve vehicles on hand. So there are going to be 2 pickups that are being brought in. Now, one of them will go out. We have one truck that's going to be replaced that will be gov-dealed, but one of the trucks that is going to be moved into a fleet capacity as a reserve vehicle for that particular department. So there'll be 2 pickups coming in, one going out and one moving as a fleet reserve vehicle. The other is that there'll be a new escape vehicle coming in, and this will be the vehicle that is replacing. We're considering that it could be gov-dealed, but we think that with the addition of the events coordinator staff and some of the other opportunities that are in that department, to have another reserve vehicle may be there, and we may want to hold on to it. It's got about 90,000 miles on it, so it's getting up there. We do need to consider if we want to try to hold on to it a little longer. It's in pretty good condition, though, for that high mileage of a vehicle. So I'm recommending at this time that we keep it.
What kind of vehicle do you say?
It's a Ford Escape.
Oh, 90,000, that's not big miles. About 160,000.
And then there's some equipment that are in that department that's coming in too. There's a couple gators that are being requested and some lawn maintenance equipment for the parks as well to support some of the, as we mentioned, there's some groundskeeper help being requested in that particular department. So some additional equipment for those folks to be able to come in and operate is being requested in the budget. Those items are on page 7 of 9 at the top. You're looking at, I think it's a total of 90,000 for the 2 trucks and the 1 vehicle, and then the lawn maintenance equipment's at $46,400. That is on the first line item under the second gray bar on page 7 of 9. All right, and then finally, the Building and Development Standards Department. This is on page 8 of 9 at the end. At the very bottom is under the gray bar is a vehicle listed. This is a situation where there's going to be 2 vehicles. Let me see if I got this right, because I don't think that's correct. There'll be 2 new vehicles coming in, and then only one going out. As Mr. Diggers mentioned in the personnel information, there are several positions being brought into that department, but there is some current fleet capacity within the department. However, one vehicle that will be coming in will be for the new inspector, which will be a new truck. Another vehicle will be an SUV that will come in, And then there'll be some other vehicles that'll be moved around so that the engineer and the codes inspector will have there'll be an additional fleet vehicle in that department to help support those two positions. So that's why we're recommending that while two are coming in, we're only going to send one out and then hold one so that we can support the additional positions. There's still, they have already we transitioned a vehicle from a personal take-home vehicle. It is now a vehicle that is a reserve fleet vehicle that's used by several different positions in the department. So that we were able to utilize it rather than it being out of pocket while it's not here on site. That's it as far as vehicles. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Will both of these vehicles be purchased through state purchase programs? Will they be purchased through the state?
That's a great question, Mayor. We're actually taking a look at a national, most of them will be purchased through the state. We're actually, in regards to some of the vehicles, taking a look at a national program to test out that has a bigger pool. Some of the costs are a little bit less expensive overall for the base price of the vehicles. What we're trying to determine at this time is what the transport cost is. And if we get one and it costs me X number of dollars to send it, how much, if I get five, does it, then my transport costs kind of even out and make it more sense. Right now, some of the ones that we're looking at are the Explorer Interceptors. We're looking at, with the fire department in the four-wheel drive for the Building and Development Standards SUV. We try to bring four-wheel drive vehicles in for that to help have vehicles in stock in case we have to transport people during bad weather events. But if we could do like 4 or 5 vehicles, we may do them through this national program to see how it goes. We just, like I said, got to get transport costs. But for the most part, all the pricing is based on state contract.
When you do that, are these pulled through local dealers?
In the state contract system is that the dealerships throughout the state bid on the contracts on an annual basis. In this case, Vic Bailey for Fords is the one that won the state contract. It's local for us. It's good. We don't have to go far away to get the vehicles, but other people in the state have to come up here once they pull that vehicle out of that particular dealership.
Even with our local vendor preference program, we find that typically our local dealers can't, even with that incentive, can't meet the state, because they do it in volume. I mean, they'll...
Is the state subsidizing that in some way, or is it just all...
It's just volume.
It's volume contract price.
Volume.
And in some states, like the national program that we're looking at, because the price is down because they're just doing so much more volume. It's a southwestern, it's Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, that kind of mid part of the U.S. Those states, obviously, the numbers of vehicles that they use are a lot higher, so they get a little bit better pricing. But I don't want to have anybody drive to Texas to pick up. I don't need to send 5 people to Texas to drive 5 cars back.
Bad enough when we have to go to Charleston to pick them up.
Exactly.
It goes down there.
David, will any software print bigger and darker fonts?
Yes.
And we can't build an apartment. You see what I've got to use? Got a magnifying glass. You're not supposed to complain about these are a lot cheaper than the software.
Yeah, I had to get the 2.0s out for the readers, the 1.5s.
Council, I don't want to prolong this any more than we need to, but we've got 7 more reports. We will expedite going through those in just a minute. Let's take about a 3-minute break and stretch your legs. Anybody needs to use the restroom, do so.
We'll monitor these others.
That shouldn't take long.
It's one of the easier ones to explain because it is an in and out fund. But David will give it his best shot.
The debt service fund is directly related to the amount of debt that we carry, and as such, as we stated earlier, the lease purchase fund is a little higher this year based on the purchases, so we did see a slight increase in the debt service fund. So we total dollars budgeted for the debt service fund for fiscal year 18, $1,594,944, and there are no significant programmatic changes, anything like that, just a slight increase due to the current year lease purchase.
We'll review the graph.
Okay, as Mr. Driggers has the graph on the screens there. This is history showing back to 2008. You can see in 2010 was our peak at $2,197,520. Hit a low point in 2014 of $1,516,945, and have held pretty steady over the last 5 years. In that $1.5 million range for debt service for proposed, ending with proposed 18 at $1,594,944. We've had a good history there of paying down our debt. That big decrease is where we're paying off the GOBs, general obligation bonds that we have held. Where we have that kind of that flat line, we have one lease purchase that rolls off with one lease purchase rolling on, so it stays fairly even through that cycle.
The general obligation bond that we're thinking about doing for projects coming up, well, we have some significant stuff rolling off, or at least going down in value before we do that.
The debt that we currently have on the books is the City Hall goes out, and this building goes out to 2023 or 25. That's the next big significant drop. We have some other revenue debt in the recreation department, or for recreation facilities, that rolls off either 23 or 25, 28. It's in that, kind of that same 3 or 4 or 5 years. It's all ending at the same time. So what we're looking at for the future is just scheduling it out, kind of rear loading as we have done in the past.
Ramp it up.
Ramping it up, correct.
Switch over to Fund 18, our hospitality taxes fund.
Again, the hospitality tax fund has no major programmatic changes. You will see a slight change in revenue for the hospitality taxes on page 1 of 1. That's the very last line, $2,030,000. As we have, seen the commercial growth for the restaurant and hotel industry. I guess hotels haven't grown recently, but restaurants certainly have. So we have increased revenue coming in on hospitality taxes. The overall budget is seeing a decrease, but that is mainly due to, if you look in the current year column for fiscal year 17, there's a fund balance appropriation of $272,000. That is where we're working on a project using fund balance reserve, cash reserves that we're holding on hand. So that does affect the budget. So as that rolls off, that does decrease the overall budget, but you will notice the very top line on the revenue side, we are budgeting to receive just shy of $50,000 from PARB grant money, paying for a project at Century Park. Total budget for hospitality taxes for fiscal year 18, $2,085,910. Any questions on that one?
Without that party grant, it would be down significantly.
Again, mainly due to the using the fund balance reserve for the project.
Yeah.
It's using cash reserve. So the operational portion of the budget is relatively just a slight change. The big change is in prior year projects.
And we'll see that in any of our funds, that if we have reserves and then we spend those reserves in a single year,
Right.
that it'll give those spikes. Yeah.
And that is indicated in the graph that we have on the screens right now. We see that big spike up from fiscal year 16 to 17 that's representing that, the project that we're using for reserves, or out of reserves, and then, decreasing back down to the current year budget, $2,085,000.
Questions? We'll move over straight to our stormwater fund, Fund 19.
In the stormwater, we have the exact same scenario that we just discussed with hospitality. We have a prior year project coming out of the fund balance reserve, the cash reserves that we have on hand. That project is just shy of $322,000, excuse me. That is mainly due to the project down at the recycle center. And we've run into some snags there. We'll be carrying that money forward from this year to next year. So you'll see that project hopefully hit the ground next year. But we'll be carrying those funds forward. But it does affect the overall budget. So you'll see a reduction from $1,025,000 down to $739,600. Again, that is a direct relationship between operational fund or operational expenses. Adding to that, you need project money that's being paid from reserves.
I do want to call your attention, particularly to this fund. During your planning retreat back in February, we had a great deal of discussion about where we saw things happening with the stormwater fund. You may recall that I indicated then that I believed that I would be making a recommendation for us to adjust our stormwater fee here, to put our stormwater fee in line with the remainder of Greenville County. As you're aware, our fee is a little bit lower. They're at about $25. We're at about $21.60, I think it is, for an equivalent residential unit. And it's nice to be lower. It is good, and that's been the fee since the day we adopted our stormwater program. One of the things that we are recognizing is that we are better positioning ourselves to take on some projects, and we will use the reserves very quickly on those projects, and we will deplete those reserves. I do believe that this is something that you're going to need to take a hard look at. I just couldn't justify it in this year's budget based on the projects that were submitted by our engineering department for us to take a look at this year.
The lack of projects?
The lack of projects, yes. Or at least the cost of projects. We're still doing projects, but they're not as costly as some of the larger ones. I do need to say that I'm very confident that we have probably delayed that as long as we're going to be able to. I'm confident that next year there will be a recommendation for us to adjust that fee to the equivalent with the remainder of Greenville County, that we would adjust our fee to $25 per ERU. And allowing for all of those funds to be earmarked and used for stormwater projects.
Wait till next year, I mean, that, you have to wait to accumulate some money longer, you know?
You do.
How much revenue does that generate? Just $4 increase?
It would be about a 20% increase.
About $140,000, $150,000.
Pay me now, pay me later. I mean, it's coming, and we're just, we were able to balance the budget without the adjustment in this budget, but I don't believe that we would be able to do it again, not with what we're needing to do out there. But it's not in this year's budget. It's not there, but I don't know, I'm hoping if I say it enough, eventually I'll have
Well,
to
I've been thinking
actually
about
do
that
it.
for several years.
It is, I mean, Mr. Webb, it's needed. It really is
It's
needed.
really too low for what it,
And you look at our comparison, when we look at that every year, others are going up consistently over time, and we've stayed stable from day one.
there's probably no end to projects out there that we could be doing if we had the money.
I'm sure if we would ask Mr. Grant, could he spend $5 million, he would know that there's that many things out there to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So why would we not go ahead and put it in there?
Well, we just didn't have the project ready
We didn't have the projects identified in this budget, so we budgeted to what was submitted as identified projects. And so if I were to do it, it would go to reserves, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, I would be the first to say that if you think it's the appropriate time to do it, it's inevitable, and it would just allow us to be 1 year ahead of doing those projects as they're identified.
But we generally have a surplus in there, don't we?
Well,
What did you say, it was 8%, or what did you say was surplus in the stormwater?
Didn't stormwater.
You didn't do stormwater? I thought you said something about stormwater earlier, or,
We're holding a surplus, but it's,
well, maybe that was during
the cash
We have a really large,
During the council
yeah,
meeting.
we have a really large project that'll take place then at the recycling center, the old public services site. It easily could have some cost overruns. We've got some things that have to happen in there, and that's going to be a large project for us as we're getting into that. And I have every reason to believe we will deplete any reserves that we have as we finish that project. Okay. Real property fund?
so this is Fund 23. This budget is kind of a catch-all project renovation budget. It's how, how we utilize this fund. So when we have projects identified, we will then fund it to do that project. So the dollars that flow in and out of this fluctuate greatly depending on the project that we are requesting to be done. So if you go back 2 years, we had $788,000 of actual revenue and expenditures. Last budget year, we budgeted $525,000. This year, we have projects identified of $373,000. That is on, you'll see that on page 1 of 2. Those are coming in $363,000 from the general fund and $10,000 from hospitality. So just to identify what those projects are for the current year. Mr. Bettis asked about one of them earlier in the lease purchase fund, so we've moved it out of lease purchase into this fund. That is on page 1 of 3 when we're looking at the expenditures there. And the $115,000 are the renovations to fire department stations 1 and 2. The next line down, you'll see a request for $95,000. Those are additional funds that are needed for the kennel. We already have $115,000 set aside, but with the additional stormwater requirements and additional requirements needed for the animal shelter, we're needing another $95,000 to be able to do that project. And that's an additional $95,000 on top of the $115,000. Turning to page 2 of 3, you'll see a request out of the recreation department on a renovation line. She's requesting money to place an automatic gate at the operations center that will help control the traffic and keep the gates closed so that people are not just coming and going that are not supposed to be there. They're not unauthorized to be going through those gates. This would be very similar to the gate on the backside of the police department if you've seen that one, to control the access to the backside of the police department. Be a gate very similar, controlling the access to the backside of the operations center and the maintenance shop. And then the last section on page 2 of 3, you'll see requests for $125,000 and 2 requests for $10,000, one for public art and one for gateways. The $125,000 is for Greer Station. All 3 of those lines are to continue funding our obligations to those agencies or those projects. And then page 3 of 3, you'll see total expenditures again, $373,370.
I think 10,000 is enough to get a flashing marquee gateway up there on the Elmore property.
We got the police sign.
If you're open to doing one, let's talk.
I know a guy.
Questions? Very good, we'll keep you moving. Sanitation Services Fund is Fund number 33, at $1,175,000.
Okay, in this fund, again, no programmatic changes, it's continuing what we have begun this fiscal year. You will notice on page 1 of 1 on the revenue side, the very last line item is cart fees, $50,000. We made a change in the current fiscal year to record the cart fees revenue that we're bringing in on the building permits. We were recording that in the general fund. And subsequent to the budget last year, we made an operational decision to record those cart fees here in the sanitation fund, since that's specifically what they were for, replacing those sanitation and garbage carts that are out in the community. So in the current fiscal year that we're in, there were no budget dollars for the cart fees, but you will see that added to fiscal year 18 in the amount of $50,000. And that accounts for most of the increase to that fund. Total revenue and expenditures there of $1,175,000.
Is our contract for payment to ACE, do we pay per household or per can?
We pay per can.
I've got 2 cans, it costs us double.
Is it double, but it's an additional fee, but I don't think it's double.
We charge for the can, but we don't charge for the picking up the extra can. We have to
Not to have the can, to dispose of the material in the can.
It's just a single charge.
Skipper, today, when people need an extra can, do they just request it?
That's right, because it's so few. It's per household.
Yeah,
There's
it's
so
per
few
household,
that they've elected not to do that.
So it's just per household.
We don't have a lot that have extra cans.
That's correct.
Well, I'm sorry, you request it's like a can, you have to purchase that can at City Hall.
And they don't charge any, do they charge extra to pick up another can? No.
No, they do it by household,
Okay.
by address.
We don't have but a few, I mean, I say a few, we have probably 100, 120 extra cans.
How much do we charge for our cans?
$65. 65.
The graph that you see, the graph that you see on the screen is really only because, as we've set up this enterprise fund for our residential garbage program, as you know, we moved from a public services fee to the sanitation fee, and it's based on those folks that are receiving the service. I have made you aware previously that we've been having discussions with our contractor. He purchased our contract about, Skipper, 4 years ago?
About 3.
3 years ago when he purchased the contract. It has become evident that there will be a request that's going to be coming to us, and I believe relatively soon, for us to renegotiate our contract. But because we operate this as an enterprise fund, we do not have enough historical data yet to really know the number of households at the rate that we charge, where this thing's going to kind of level out. But we need to be aware that request for renegotiation of our fee will indeed occur. It will probably force that fund to operate, at least in its first year. If we do that, and at what level, it will force that fund to have a deficit, at least in its first year. Council then will have to take a look at whether or not we believe that deficit would level out based on some historical and data and growth, or do we need to make adjustments to the fee, or do we look to subsidize the fee? Those are all options that are available to you. But all indicators are, and all discussions that we've had with ACE, is that there will be a request for renegotiation on that. It will be a complicated process for us. They will be coming to see you as early as the last meeting in July. Again, I believe it'll be a very complicated process as we review that existing contract and we review what our options are. And for that reason, I did not think that it was appropriate to recommend any changes in the expense or revenue structure of this fund, of Fund 33. But you will have to make some policy decisions when you receive that information and determine a path forward for us as we go into 2018. But insufficient data to make any recommendations as an adjustment to the budget at this time. So, we won't hear from them until after the fiscal year has already begun. So I just could not make any adjustments, not knowing what that would be. But it's coming, and we've been talking about that for a little while as well.
So while we may lack some data, we know that as of 5/25, we're at $988,000 and an approved budget of 1.175. We're $175,000, $195,000 difference there. That doesn't, we didn't add that many households, so we're already subsidizing.
Yes. Well, we're not subsidizing.
Fresh.
Yeah, well, when you said when we're already, I'm not sure I understand the question.
He's just saying there's a $100,000 gap up here already.
Well, that's from 17 to 18 proposed.
Yeah, but that's not accounted for in terms of growth. I mean, we didn't, we're not.
Well, it's $100,000
$200,000. That's money that's coming from somewhere that we didn't add $200,000 worth of new revenue.
No, it's just growth, yeah.
Yeah, it's growth.
And then part of that is, well, on the revenue side, is the cart fees, and making up a portion of that. That there's projecting, I took the actual and annualized it, and then projected another 400 houses.
Yeah. And just to give you some idea, I would anticipate that by 2019, based on what I would expect we'll get as a request for renegotiation of that contract and what I would expect that we'll see in continued residential development, probably by 2019, we're looking at that fund needing about $1.6 million. Again, growth plus adjustment to rate. That's speculative at this point, but I'm kind of seeing the writing on the wall. Yeah, I am expecting a significant increase, and that's why I just didn't think that it was appropriate to try to speculate that in this budget, and we don't have the numbers. And so while I'm cautious and I'm concerned, I think it's something that we'll have to address in this next fiscal year, but I don't think there's sufficient time for council to make a decision relative to our fee and what we'll do. I think we're just going to have to get some historical data. I think we're going to have to operate it for at least 2 to 3 years to see what pattern is going to happen there. If it operates at a larger deficit than we're anticipating, then that's not a good thing. But if it's less, then we don't have to do full cost recovery because the program with growth is generating enough efficiency to help us with some of that.
Well, if it's a fairly significant increase, and of course, we can talk about all this when all that. Would we really not be obligated to take some bids on that thing?
I think so. Sure. I absolutely think so.
they're nice guys and everything, but public's money is the public.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and again, it was, my concern is that for that, just to your point, I thought we could bog down in this issue and we don't have enough data to make a decision. We just don't have it. So I felt it was more appropriate, instead of speculating, we know it's coming and we know those discussions are happening, and we're just going to have to deal with it when we get it.
I wouldn't be comfortable raising it until we know exactly what's happening.
Right. Facilities use?
The Facilities Use Fund, this is Fund 50. Again, this is carrying forward with the programs that are already in place, so no new programmatic changes. If you look at the different line items, you will see some variations in revenue between rental fees between City Hall and Cannon Center, but they're all relatively minor. You see the current year's budget, $252,000, dropping down about $20,000 to $233,284. Most of that is directly related to the carrying forward of current projects that are underway and reduction of the fund balance appropriation to do those current projects, carrying some of that money forward. So again, total requested budget there, $233,284.
You ever get any complaints from the private sector about us putting in weddings and competing, stuff like that?
No, we don't. It's what we have been told is that our presence has increased their business. And yeah, it has been good, but I've never had that raised.
Other providers stay full.
Yeah, their facilities are full also.
They do complain, but they're staying full.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing.
All of our restaurants love it, so.
And our last fund is our road paving fund, Fund 60.
Okay, paving fund here, Fund 60 is again virtually identical to prior years, no programmatic changes. There is one expenditure change I'll just bring to your attention that is on the second page in your handout, page 1 of 1, but it's the second page. In our current fiscal year, we did the demonstration project on Brushy Creek Road for the sidewalk. Has turned out very well, but that has depleted all of our sidewalk money. Where we have historically put in about $50,000 per year in sidewalks, we're recommending that we go ahead and put in $100,000 to replenish those sidewalk funds to be able to do additional sidewalks in the current year, or assuming in fiscal year 18. So total dollars requested for the budget paving fund, $450,000.
For our traffic calming, are we gonna still look at citizens? Contribute to that?
It certainly is an option for us. Ironically, we don't get a lot of requests. We'll get a request that says, will you come put a speed hump in? And then we'll say, well, here is what we need to determine what your need is, what's actually happening. And what we find is that we don't get very good follow-through from folks. And where we typically see that fall apart a bit, and not always, but where we'll typically see that fall apart, is when that person goes to their neighbor and says, this is what I want the city to come do, and the neighbor goes, I don't want that. and we find that they can't get the support that they're really needing among their own neighbors.
And while the requests are minimal, and there is no funding in the current requested budget, we do have $47,000 in reserve for those.
Yeah, for that purpose.
So there is money sitting there, set aside and reserved for that purpose.
And one of the things too, we do traffic calming projects, just using signage and other things too, rather than actually doing speed humps and things like that. We've done some things in some neighborhoods, like children that play and, stop signs, things like that, to slow things down as well. So we do some traffic calming, just not
That's
speed humps.
something I'm definitely not for.
Just checking. Those are all of our funds, obviously our general fund and all of our special funds. We certainly wanted to make sure that in the environment this evening, that we had a chance to get to talk about the why, the programming, what we're trying to achieve in the budget. The budgets are made available to you to review at whatever scrutiny that you feel is necessary. We are open to making sure that we are getting answers for you on all of that. So again, we encourage you as you go through these budgets, as possibly your constituents take a look at these budgets, anything that our finance department, our department heads, myself, any of us can do to make sure that you have the information that you need as we approach first reading. Your next regular meeting is June 13th. At that meeting, the budget ordinance itself will be on the agenda. The budget ordinance would be to adopt the budgets as proposed. If council were to have amendments, certainly that is the time for any of those amendments to be made available. We would encourage you, and we would ask that if you believe that you're going to propose amendments, that we would try to do that at first reading, because that will help us greatly as we would go into the public hearing and second reading that would be on June 27th. So again, both that public hearing and second reading. The budgets take effect on July 1. If we were to believe for any reason that on the June 27th meeting that we would not adopt a budget, we would need to have a continuing resolution prepared to add to your agenda, because we will need to continue to operate the city moving past July 1. The current year's budget is only effective through June 30th, and so we either adopt a new budget or we have to have a continuing resolution that we would continue under the old budget moving forward. We've never had that as an issue or a concern. We've been very fortunate to be able to get our budgets approved and passed, but we know that that's a possibility, so we have to be prepared for it as well. That is our presentation. It is the information that we needed to share. I do want to thank our staff that are here with us this evening. As I told them earlier, the way that this works is that if we ask them to come, we don't have nearly as many questions than if they're not out there. And so it's they give the time, and they're here because they are here to answer your questions. So as you conclude the meeting tonight, we encourage you, if you have any questions from the dais now that you would like to ask of any of our staff, we are here to do that. And again, meeting adjourns, you have a one-on-one or a sidebar, we are glad to do that as well. We estimate that there's about 500 hours of staff time that's put into this process. Not counting the number of the renditions of the budget that David has dealt with, but I have reviewed 6 versions of the budget, and it changes every time we work on it. And so that's why you got the memo on Friday that said, as we finish up Memorial Day, we come in today, we will find out, literally, you can see the time stamp on the budgets. I think they were printed today at, 12:15 today, as we were finalizing getting all of this information to you. We are very, as a staff and as your administrator, we and I are very comfortable that this is a good, sound operating budget, but we recognize that in your role, there may be some shift of priority or concern that from a policy perspective, you need us to make some adjustments or amendments. We are very open to that. This is your budget. Once you adopt it, we as staff will take this document and we will administer
the day-to-day operations of the city for the next 365 days with the resources that you've made available to us. And so we want you to have your questions answered. We want to make sure we're giving you the information that you need in this process. So we thank you for allowing us the time to do that so that you have the information that you need. Any questions?
Council?
How many total employees do we have now?
229 and a half positions. We're budgeted at 229 and a half positions in the current budget.
That's with the new position.
New positions would be the 12 and a half added to that, which would be 243. Now, we don't maintain that number of positions. I think we got about 11 positions open right now. We budget for that many, but we don't have that many people.
The new ones are what you're filling, or that?
No. We're constantly in a state of hiring. We constantly have about 10 positions open. I mean, just through attrition, rotation, people leaving. That's just the nature of it. There's usually somewhere around 10 positions open at any given time.
If Mr. Sill is correct, and I'm assuming that he is, that's 229 and a half plus 12 and a half.
243 is what will be in this next budget, budgeted positions. $229 and a half plus 12 and a half is 243.
We'll sit here and add it up.
242?
I want to thank y'all for staying in that too. We appreciate not only your time this evening, but your time in putting this budget proposal together for us. Thank you, Jeremy.